Well, hello, Metro family. It is good to be together again for this episode of the Collective Leadership Podcast, a podcast that is all about collaborating for kingdom renewal and holistic gospel transformation. Today, I have a very special guest. I'm super excited to be joined by Reverend Pastor Ashley Tringale.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's a joy to have you. Really excited about our conversation. We've been having all these conversations before we got online.
Yeah, well, we went to school together.
We did go to school together.
Yeah, lots of things.
Yeah, and one of the things that I will say that I remember most, one of the memories that I have about you at Nyack College is that you were the best preacher in our class.
That's kind.
No offense to anybody else. And I will say there's a number of you out there that were, maybe still are better than me, are better than me. But I just remember you, like the sermons that you preached, so impactful and just, you just brought it. So
thank you.
It's awesome. Yeah, excited to have you here. So for this session, for this episode, we're looking at a number of things. We're going to be probably talking about some leadership development things, ministry and life in the Spirit.
Sure.
You are the executive pastor here at Risen King Alliance Church.
Yes, I am.
Where we are recording today.
Yep,
so
right
thank
here.
you, Risen King, as usual. But obviously you didn't start there or, your journey. So for the people that do not know who you are, why don't you just give us some background, family stuff, ministry stuff, calling maybe,
Sure. So you already said, my name is Ashley. I grew up in this area in Orange County, so not far from where we are right now. I felt a call to ministry when I was in high school. And so every kind of choice after that was just to pursue that. I thought it looked like one thing. I thought it looked like youth ministry and going to big conferences and jumping on bouncy houses and like staying up till midnight. But then when I was a junior, I had an opportunity to be a part of Nicky Cruz outreach. And Nicky Cruz, if you're familiar with Times Square Church and David Wilkerson, he wrote The Cross and the Switchblade about his story with Nicky Cruz. And Nicky Cruz has a version called Run Baby Run, and it's Nicky's version and David Wilkerson's version. And so Nicky Cruz developed an evangelism ministry, and he would take teenagers to travel with him and do like setup work for his big crusades. And it was performing arts. It was singing and dancing. Don't ask me to dance. I'm not gonna sing. I was there for acting, but there are some videos if you YouTube it.
Oh,
I'm
yes.
Going to put it out there.
We're going to put that in the show
always
notes.
ask. No, don't do that. So yeah, it was really from being a part of that I decided that I wanted to stay close to New York City. I really got a heart for the diversity of the team that I was working with, and really wanted to stay close to New York, which is how I kind of stumbled upon Nyack College.
Okay.
So when I went to Nyack, I met my husband. I am married and have 4 kids. In the throes of the teen years now. I'm getting ahead of myself, but so went to Nyack. I thought I wanted to be a missions major because I had traveled with Nicky Cruz, and I thought maybe missions is what I want to do. And actually, if I hadn't signed up to be a missions major, I wouldn't have been put in the same orientation group with Gabe.
Okay.
And not that I don't think we would have met other ways, but because of that, we were in the same group and met on the first day of school. And that's what struck up a conversation. What do you want to do? I want to do missions. I want to do missions. And so struck up a friendship from us. But after being in the missions department for a little while, I thought, I really want to learn how to preach. Like, I really want to learn how to do this, not necessarily the theology of why we're doing this. I want to learn some practical stuff.
Yeah.
And I had heard Ron Walborn preach, and he was the head of the department at the time. And I was like, that's where I want to be. So I switched to a pastoral min major because I thought if I learn to preach and I learn leadership, that's applicable across the board, wherever we end up. But still all in the pursuit of doing missions work.
Okay.
And so then graduated from NIAC. My husband became a teacher. I became a nanny, and really just thought, okay, this is what there is for me now. Maybe we'll travel eventually. But I would pray for the kids that I nannied, and I just felt like that was my ministry, was to these kids. And I always wanted to be a mom, and so it was kind of like practice. I was with the kids a lot. So nannied, then my husband got a job here, part-time as the worship pastor. And I remember being introduced to the congregation in this room, and I remember standing on the stage and looking out at the audience or the crowd or the congregation and thinking, like, these are my people. Like, this is going to be my church, my home church. This is where they'll throw me baby showers. Like, I just had this picture that this was where we were supposed to be. But again, I think we still had in the back of our minds that maybe one day we'd end up on the mission field, or maybe one day that's what it would look like. Because I think you make a lot of, you think about your future in terms of your experience. And so that was our experience of what missions work looked like. And then also, this is like a really expensive part of the country to live in. And so there's also the element of like, how could we ever stay here? So anyway,
but God makes a way.
Yeah, exactly. So he stepped into the role of worship pastor. I volunteered and served, and I actually babysat and nannied pretty much every staff member's kids at this church.
Wow.
And at the same time, started having my own children as well. And so I was nannying, and the administrative assistant at the time came to pick up her kids. And she said, I have to tell you what's going on with me and my husband. And she said that they felt a call to be international workers. And so I knew that left a vacant spot in the staff. And I thought, if I'm gonna put my kids in childcare or leave them to do something, it's gonna have to be meaningful to me, and it's gonna have to be like to use my degree to step into ministry. And so that just started a pursuit of, hey, is there a space for me here at Risen King? And so it was probably about 9 months to a year later that I stepped in as the administrative assistant. And then that quickly changed to being the executive assistant, and then pastor of operations, and then the executive pastor. So I always tell people I did not apply to be the executive pastor. It was just a series of saying yes to what the Lord had in front of us. And he provided a way financially for us to be here, to buy a house, to put roots down here, to raise our family here, to be involved in the community here. And so even though we thought it would be international missions work, we really do see everything that we do here as being on mission in Rockland County.
Amen.
And so, so I've been the executive pastor for 8 years, but been on staff for about 11 years.
Okay, awesome. And so for this episode, we'll see what the official title is.
Sure.
But, we're really looking at this as you're an executive pastor. Obviously, it seems like a lot of your gift sets can help you in that role, right? Execute that role really well.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into some of that.
Sure.
But what we want pastors to eventually walk away with is, for most pastors, a lot of them are going to be like single staff. Maybe there's an administrative assistant that helps them out. It could be part-time, could be volunteer, but they don't necessarily get to maybe have the opportunity to hire an executive pastor. And so what could it look like for our lead pastors to have an executive pastor when maybe the funds aren't there, maybe the space isn't there, but as a pastor, you have this need, okay? So we're going to kind of like just letting y'all know this is where we're going, what we're diving into, So as an executive pastor, what do you do? Like, what's your role?
Yeah.
What do you love about your role?
Yeah.
And maybe I won't ask you what you hate about your role, but we'll see. We'll see how we get there.
I mean, you're catching me at a week, right? It's been a week. I know others have had a week too. But so when I became the executive pastor, it was very, I want to say organic. It just kind of happened. I had kind of, when I was the administrative assistant, I was here, and I remember I had organized every closet. I'd cleaned out everything. And I remember there would be Fridays where I'm like, I've answered every email. Like, I don't know what else to do. Let me clean out closets. Let me reorganize. And so I think from the start, I really felt like my mission was to support the church. And so anything that I could do, even if it didn't necessarily fall into my job description, my mission was to support the church. And so then it became supporting other staff, our children's person at the time. How can I help you with that event? Like, let's talk through certain things. And then I think that we were at a time of growth. And so Pastor Mike, seeing that I had stepped into already supporting the staff, really just giving me the title of executive pastor was giving me the authority to be the executive pastor. And so I think that as the executive pastor, my primary role is to pull as much away from the senior pastor as I possibly can. His primary focus should be on the vision of the church, the preaching, the teaching. But I'll say this, I didn't know what it meant to be an executive pastor.
Okay.
And so I had to kind of discover what that meant. And so I reached out to other executive pastors, and I think it was Rob Childs, who was out in Salem at the time.
Okay.
I said, hey, can I see a copy of your job description? And he said, you can, but just know if you've seen one XP's job description, you've only seen one XP's job description because they can look different across the board. And even as I've been on this journey as an XPM in a phenomenal network of other female executive pastors, and just hearing some of the things that they do, there's a lot of similarities, but there can be a lot of differences, which is why I say my number one role is to support the church and to take as much off the senior pastor as possible. And so that can look different in every context. But in our context, that looks like Pastor Mike gets to focus on where we're going as a church. What are we doing in this season? Where is the Lord leading? Where do we want to take our people? And then my job is to go, okay, how do we do it? Now, that doesn't mean that I'm doing it. I have an amazing staff that actually does the work of the church, and I get to be the oversight to them. A lot of times XPs are the tiebreaker if there's like a back and forth of should we do this, should we do that. A lot of time XPs are like, nope, this is the vision, this is what we're going to do. I do a lot of organization. I do a lot of strategy. I do a lot of operations. Some churches have HR. Some churches don't have HR. I think a lot of churches probably don't have HR. So XPs often find themselves doing a lot of HR stuff. And that's actually a conversation that has come up when I'm in this WXP network. It's like, do you do more ministry or do you do more like HR type stuff? I love doing the ministry stuff. I have a skill set that allows me to do the HR stuff. And so I am lucky enough to be in a place that values both of those. And that's why I get the opportunity to preach. Not all XPs preach. Not all XPs want to preach. And so that's why it just looks different across the board. But if there are things that I can do to alleviate our senior pastor from having to be in the nuances of things, then that's my job, is so that he can listen to the Holy Spirit and go, where are we going as a church? What's the vision? He doesn't, he will eventually, but I'm usually the first step. He doesn't have to deal with some of the annoying sides of ministry head on. I usually absorb it first. I'm kind of like the buffer, and then I'll communicate with him. So, staff hirings, we'll talk about who we want to hire, but I get to sit in those meetings of who we're going to hire, form the job descriptions. So there's a lot, but I think it can look different across the board depending on where you're at as a church, where the most needs are. That's a little bit of what I get to do here.
Which is, it's wide.
It's a lot, and every day looks different. Every day is different.
Talk to me. It's a number of questions based on what you just said.
Sure.
What was the main difference between pastor of operations? I think you said this, and it's going to lead me to my next question. Between being a pastor of operations, because that can sound like, you're the executive pastor. Like that just can be the automatic, like you just don't call it that. So what was that shift? Yeah. What's the big difference? And then we'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah. So it was definitely being given the authority
Mm-hmm.
to have oversight. It's one thing if you're working alongside somebody and you're saying like, "Hey, Omar, you were late today. It would probably be better if you came here on time. You know, like maybe it would help if you didn't show up 5 minutes before the service." That's very different than somebody who has the authority to go, "Omar, you were late again. Let's talk about this. This is, unfortunately, there are HR sides to ministry. And so let's talk about this. Like, if you're late again, we're going to have another conversation." I didn't necessarily have the authority to kind of make corrective steps previously, but once given the title, which was actually probably one of the hardest transitions because you're going from peers
That's exactly where I was
to
going.
oversight. And that was a really, really hard season.
Yeah.
It was really hard to navigate. There was a lot of like, are you sure it's okay if I do this? Are you sure? And then even for Pastor Mike, our senior pastor, he'd never had a true executive pastor before. So certain things that he was still doing that I felt like, you know, why didn't I do that? Well, it's not because I was being overlooked. It's because we've never been in this situation before. Or, you know, I might tell somebody, this is a value, but he might say it's not a value. And so really what we had to learn was we had to learn how to work together and learn what was the most beneficial to him. I never want to overstep Pastor Mike. He is the leader of this church. He's the senior leader. At the end of the day, he's the one responsible, you know? But if he's authorizing me and he's giving me that position, then that means that I know his heart. I kind of say it this way. I've learned to speak Mike. And so if I've learned to speak Mike, then I can communicate Mike to the rest of the staff.
Yeah, that's good.
But yeah, that transition from being peers to being oversight, especially when you're all even around the same age and the same demographic, it is rough.
Yeah.
It's
So
rough.
let's talk about that.
Okay.
What was happening? Feel free to talk about the external stuff, but like internally,
Yeah.
right? As a female pastor, right? Like, what are some of the things that you had to navigate just like within yourself?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I think I you know, a lot of like, am I really supposed to do this? Like, those were questions that I would ask a lot. Like, are you sure it's okay? Like, I would ask a lot of questions to Mike, like, hey, I want to send this email. Can you look it over and make sure it's okay? Now, I still do that often because I do think it's best practice. But I think at the time it was more so, is it okay if I send it? Not as much like, hey, I just want to make sure you know what I'm communicating. But internally, I was like, are you guys sure? But it was really the governing board of the church that put me in the role. And so I'm like, okay, if they see this in me and Mike sees it in me and he's trusting me, like I had to keep going back to that. Like I didn't force my way into this. And I think that that was probably one of the things that I struggled with was like, did I make this happen? Because I didn't mean to make this happen if I made this happen. But realizing I didn't. Like I didn't do this.
Yeah.
The Lord did this.
Yeah.
And so I had to trust that. But internally, that's what I was navigating, feeling like, I mean, I think as women, you can be stereotyped as like controlling, you can be bossy, you can be all these things. And I'm like, did I like boss my way into this? Did I control my way into this? Like, I didn't mean to if I did, you know, those kind of feelings. But just really going, okay, no, like the Lord provided a place for me, which was my prayer when we came here, that I would have a place here and feeling like I had a place here, but not knowing what it looked like. And he gave me the resources and the tools and the skill set to do it.
Yeah.
And so learning to trust that, and that there were other people in my life that affirmed that, you know, the board, mentors in my life, Pastor Mike, no, this is what we want from you.
Yeah.
We want you to develop in this.
Yeah.
We want to free Mike up to not have to think about these things. So it was a slow process of going like, no, it's okay. It's okay if I do this. It's okay if I do this.
Yeah. What was it like then engaging with people that were your peers and now you have authority over them? Was Was there pushback that you received? Was it like, what
Yeah.
surprised you about kind of all that?
So yes, I wouldn't say there was overt pushback. I would say, we've had some transitions over the years.
Mm.
I think in a post transition sense of some people who have stepped away, I don't think I realized some of the issues that they were having were actually because of the structure of our current staff. So what I mean by that is, we are very relational. It's part of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
We say that our staff is more like family.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're like family, you get access to Pastor Mike.
Yeah.
And so you can go and sit and have a conversation with Pastor Mike, and you can walk away from that feeling one way. And then I have to come in a very HR way and go like, this is great. And we want to empower you to this, but like, there's also a proper way to do certain things. And so I would say that feels uncomfortable when you didn't previously have that.
Yeah.
And we are very much our goal as a team is I want our staff to lead out of their personality. I don't like to micromanage. I don't like to tell you how you have to do something. However, there has to be some structure and there has to be some communication, and you have to show up on time, those kinds of things. And so I think that was probably what felt the most difficult is almost like you could kind of get away with certain things. And now that we're trying to make things a little bit more orderly, a little bit more up to snuff, so to speak, still lead out of your own personality. I still don't want to micromanage you, but I still need to let you know that we have certain structures and certain policies and things like that. So I think there were definitely growing pains.
Mm-hmm.
There was some that there wasn't pushback, but it was also just their time to transition out. So I'm trying to think who was even on staff that is still on staff when I was put in that role. I think a lot of those people have kind of transitioned out for various reasons. Sure. But yeah, that was there's probably one that's still, but even that was like it also depends on your personality. I don't know, or you're familiar with the SDI.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If you're green on the SDI and what's important to you is doing things right, it's not going to bother you that there's somebody new. Now there's somebody new. The right order is this.
Right.
If you're a red or a blue, you might feel a different way. And so I would say, even just in terms of that, I think those that were like, no, this is the proper order. This is how it's supposed to be. We get it. No problems.
Mm-hmm.
But those that were more relational, like, wait, why do we have this now? We didn't have this before.
Something a little bit more informal, and your culture is a highly relational culture.
Very,
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. So other flip side of this now,
Yep.
which you were definitely talked about, was your relationship with Pastor Mike, and really any XP relationship with the lead pastor. Yeah. And one of the things that you mentioned was, I learned to speak Pastor Mike.
Yeah.
Right? You're here to be able to kind of almost take everything off of his plate so that he can continue to be the senior lead, continue to give vision, direction for where the church is going. What else did you have to learn like along the way to like feel like necessary to do my job?
I would say, especially with how I came to be in this role, I think that people saw gifts in me that I didn't necessarily, I wouldn't maybe have identified them for myself. But I think the biggest thing that I had to learn was more personal than like skill set. And so to be an XP, you're essentially leading from the second chair. There's a book, Leading from the Second Chair. Yep. And so I have to be comfortable with, like, I could say something. I could say, I think this is what we ought to do. I could do that. But if our senior pastor wants to come in and do something different, that has to be okay. So that means that my identity has to be secure. My own self-worth has to be secure, because if my identity and worth is wrapped up in like that I get to be up front or I get to be in charge, then when somebody else comes and is in charge, I'm going to feel like overridden at every corner.
Threatened.
Exactly. And one of the most helpful things that I mentioned was being a part of this network of other WXPs and getting resources. And one of the women, I'll never forget, she described it as like a dance. It's a dance because sometimes, your senior pastor's there and you're in the background, you're dancing, but then the lead pastor kind of goes away and you're like, well, now I got to be up here. And then he comes back and you got to be back here. And so it's really learning when it's time for you to step up and when it's time for you to back down a little bit.
Yeah. Wow. You're having a blast doing your job.
Total blast.
A pastor, like we said before, right? Like, here's what I'm hearing. I mean, I guess multiple categories. One is you've got to be like in lockstep in a lot of ways with the lead pastor, and also leave a tremendous amount of room for the fact that we can change on a dime, and I've got to be okay with that. So there's two things happening. Not just I can speak, Pastor Mike, but I'm very clear about the vision. I'm continuing to ask that question of alignment, but then being flexible to the new thing that God may be up to, right?
Yeah.
That maybe sounds a little bit different, feels a little bit different from what you've known, right? Okay. Seems like, you have high IQ in the administrative realm, right? Obviously, you've got to be able to grow in your own authority when it comes to this. But it was I'm curious by this aspect of like, if you've seen one XP job description, you've only just seen one. So here's my question.
Okay.
To the best of your ability, right?
Yeah.
When someone is desiring to have this kind of role, right? Like maybe doesn't want to be the lead pastor, but is like, I want to help in every way possible.
Yeah.
What would be some core characteristics? Are there core as you've been a part of the WXPs?
Yeah, women executive pastors. Yeah.
That network, are there like core characteristics that you see in them and are shared? Like, if you're going to be a successful XP, these are things that have to be in place.
I mean, the big one, which I already said, was they all kind of have said they've learned their lead's language. So you learn to speak them. You learn to, which I just want to say is let me be careful how I say this. I'm not saying it's like parenting your lead pastor, but it is a little bit like parenting in the sense that as a parent, I feel like it is my job to enter my kids' worlds and understand them and learn their language. And that's how I feel for our lead and also for our team altogether is I've got to learn how to speak their language so that I know how to communicate. So I would say just with that, communication is a big one that I see. Organization is a big one that I see. Strategy, being able to strategize, being able to organize, being able to communicate, being able to kind of see the big picture and kind of pull the pieces out of where we need to go. That's kind of where I see across the board that most XPs have kind of the ability to go, okay, I know where we're going and I'm going to help us get to where we're going.
I love that. What is... when now like let's flip the table, right? We kind of early up front I said, hey, a lot of our churches, like you as a pastor, you may be listening and say like, well, I don't know that I'll ever have an XP, or like I don't know that we necessarily can do that, or maybe I lead a little bit differently, even maybe I don't want an XP. What would you say, like, from the lead pastor's perspective, what should they have eyes for? Like, take the person that says, like, I don't know if I could have an XP. Like, maybe the finances and the resources aren't there. What are you looking for? Like, what would you be looking for if you were looking to fill that role?
Well, the first thing that I did want to say is I think you're right. A lot of churches are not at the place of even necessarily needing an XP, so to speak, in an org chart kind of way. But I do think that it is only a benefit to the senior pastor to continue clarifying what they do. And that can look different. Like I said, I know XPs who are very specified, like there's XPs of family life. And so they're really only oversight to like children and youth and family ministry. They're not necessarily oversight to finances and other things. So it can look different, and it can be tailored to your needs, to where you're at as a church. And I really don't think it's about the finances or even the title. It's more about the authority and having the backing of your governing board, of your senior pastor to go, no, this is the person that I have put in position to be responsible for this. If I were to fill an XP role, I would definitely be looking for someone who can strategize. I would definitely be looking for someone who is probably more of on the organizational side, less of a creative and more of like an organizer. Okay. I think you need creativity, but I think the amount of information and the amount of things that you have to kind of sort as an XP, you probably need someone who is able to kind of see the most important thing, be able to make a decision, not afraid to speak up, not afraid to disagree, but also being willing to say, like, one of the phrases that I use a lot is like, I disagree, but it's not a hill that I'm willing to die on. And being clear on the things that there are hills that I'm going to die on. Like, this is important, but there are other ones that I'm going to offer up and go, I don't agree. But it's not going to make or break anything, so to speak. So somebody who's willing to speak their mind, but also who's willing to kind of back down, who doesn't have to win every battle, so to speak. I think I said this already, but the communication is huge, and a humbleness to recognize that you are leading from the second chair. And sometimes that means that you've done a lot of things that other people don't know that you have done. You're kind of holding a lot of things together that maybe somebody else is getting credit for, or you don't know the amount of conversations I had to have with that person to even make that thing happen. But that has to be okay. So those are the type of things that I would say would make somebody a good XP.
You talked like as you move through like Risen King, right? Like administrative, executive, admin, all of that. When you look back on your life and just kind of reflect, like, what were are there key things that you look back to and you're like, wow, God, I didn't realize that you were doing that back then, but I see how that's come to play like today, and why I need that. Can you kind of give us a look into that?
Yeah, I definitely, so I am an 8 on the Enneagram.
Okay.
I'm a challenger. I was definitely the kid that I remember my grandmother used to always yell at my cousin and my brother to be a leader and not a follower, because I was always the leader and leading everybody into trouble. So I think I've always been a leader. I think I've always been, I don't like to hide my feelings, sometimes to a fault. I think that those things are things that I've had to like develop so that they're not unhealthy. But I think that those were things that were innate in me, being able to speak my mind, being able to lead, kind of being in a room and recognizing where I fall into that room. Like if I need to be quiet, if I need to speak up, if there's something that needs to be said that hasn't been said, if it's a hill I need to die on, if it's not a hill that I need to die on. But then the other thing is, like when I look back even to my time with Nikki Cruz Outreach, I was the only Caucasian person on the team. I think I was the youngest one on the team. Okay. And so I have found myself in situations like that often, where I'm either the only one and I was also the only one that didn't live in the city. I lived in the suburbs. And so I have found myself being in that position where maybe I'm the only woman in the room, or maybe I'm the only Caucasian person in the room, or maybe I'm the only person who has the responsibilities of XP, and I'm called a pastor, but every other person is called a director. And so even just the Lord putting me in those situations, I think has equipped me for just being in a diverse staff. Like we have an incredibly diverse staff, which I feel incredibly honored to get to be a part of. And then also within, like I said, the Nikki Cruz outreach, like I remember when we were in Oslo, Norway, and I remember just kind of naturally taking on the role of making sure that everybody got to where we needed to get to. Like when some of all the girls were together, when some of them wanted to go off and do something else, I was just the responsible one. Now, some of that I've had to look at because of my family story or because of my dysfunction. Like some of my responsibility isn't always a good thing, but it can be when it's redeemed, right? Feeling like you have to be responsible for everything, like that's a lie from the enemy.
Yeah.
But being someone who is highly responsible and is going like, Lord, I will be responsible for whatever you want me to be responsible for. I think that's been huge. And then I don't remember if I said this before, but I do think that the love of the church, not the love of the role. Like this is going back to your question about like what I would look for to hire, like someone who loves the mission of the church, because that's really what you're doing. You know, I think that, and that looks different on every level. So like if you're passionate about children, that's obviously a very specified space. Like you're passionate about children and you're passionate about them having experience with God, you're probably going to be in a more kids-oriented space.
Sure.
But as an XP, like I am passionate about the mission of the church and what we're doing here. And so, and how we can implement that in every area.
Wow.
And I think that that's just probably innate in me and how God made me. I kind of derailed there a little bit, but
No, that's great. That's great. I think some of the things that are like, striking, obviously, and I don't think we talk about this enough. Like, I mean, you led with this like vulnerability, really, of I hope I didn't force this. I hope I didn't, make this manipulate it to happen, right? You talked about like there's a humility, right, that comes, with the role, right? That I've had so many conversations to actually get that to be where it is, right? But someone else is going to get the credit for that, right? So in church, I don't know that we necessarily talk enough about like waiting. We do say wait on the Lord, right? And that's all good and well, you know. But like when you're in a role, when you're in ministry, you're there because you do want to see something happen. Maybe it's in a very specified place. Maybe it's on a wider level. But there's a desire to see movement. There's a desire, to have impact. But we just don't necessarily lean into like, what does it mean to be humble in the midst of all of this? Like, no, let's give God credit. Yes, we know that.
Sure.
But sometimes we can just say that. Well, we really don't mean it.
Right.
It's like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Praise the Lord. But yes, I did make that happen.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important, like what you're bringing up, here when it comes to that. One thing also going back, I'm curious about, because I think you're right. A lot of our churches don't necessarily, this is just church across the board, and like singling Metro or anything,
Sure.
don't have an HR department, even like HR policies, like talk to us about just the importance of that and getting a handle around that. Why?
Yeah. So I told you I'm an 8. Like okay. I'm a rule follower, but I like to find loopholes. That's my statement. I like if I think I'm going to get in trouble, I'm not going to break the rule.
Yeah.
I feel like you need tracks to run on. That doesn't mean like you develop policy so that you have a place to go back to. It doesn't mean you live and die by policy, right? So like if everything's working, why would you go back to go, well, actually we said, blah, 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 blah. Like to me, you have tracks to run on so that if you need to get back and touch home, you can go back and touch home. just, you have to go, like, one of our values, like, we love to be flexible with our staff. Ministry is hard.
Mm.
It's really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so we try to be very intentional with comp time. And so if you work a big event, then you get to have like an extra day off.
Mm-hmm.
Now, our policy states that you get X amount of time off. But I get to also say, hey, let's close the office on Wednesday because we worked really hard.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like you have policy so that things don't get taken advantage of,
Yeah.
so that you have a place to go back to, so that if you run into an issue, and I've run into issues with staff, that you have to correct something, you can point back to and go, no, remember we talked about this? Remember this? Now, it doesn't mean that there's freedom and flexibility, and I'm certainly not saying that we break the rules or bend the rules,
Right.
but you have tracks to run on, but you also have freedom to kind of move, but you have a place to come back to.
Yeah.
That's why I think structure is important. That's why I think policies. You have to have policies because it also makes it difficult. And I've called Brian Snyder in the district office many a time to go, I'm having this issue, and he's like, do you have it in your handbook? This, and I'm like, no, I don't have it in my handbook. And then go back to the handbook and make sure that we have it, and then send everybody a revised version, and then all these things. But I do think having those things are important because it's only there to help. You have rules for your kids because you want to protect them, not because you want to harm them.
Yeah.
You
Yes.
have systems at home because you want things to run properly, not because you're trying to, control and get like, no, it has to be this way. But you do things like that so that there's clarity across the board and so that people know what's expected of them.
Yeah.
But you also, personally, again, I'm an 8, I feel like you should also live and die by policy.
Mm-hmm.
Policy should be there to help you, to support you, not to rule you or to hold you back.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think it's important. I've seen what it looks like to not have it, and I've seen what it looks like to have it, and it makes a world of difference.
Mm-hmm. And I love even what you said, previously about like someone in this XP role. There should be like a love of the church, right? Like,
yeah,
you can obviously look at this and say, well, we need policy, we need structure, because I love policy and
Right.
structure, right? And we serve policy and structure. But that is going to, in some way, it will, if that's what the like sacred cow is, right, in someone's life, that's going to bring all these hindrances,
Right.
to the ministry and where we want to be able to go.
right.
But if you have a love for the church, you can hold this loosely,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
you can.
And you can deal with things on a case by case.
Mm-hmm.
I will not go into the details because it's all very fresh and still in behind closed doors, I would say. But I've had to have 3 different types of staff conversations this week, and all of them are going to look different. They're all they all fit the policy, but how we're responding within that policy, it just looks different.
Yeah.
And so that's where I feel like you have them to guide you, not to rule you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ashley, thank you. This has been awesome. We love to kind of give people an opportunity to speak to like our leaders, pastors. Is there a charge, like you'd say, in this? Would there be, hey, consider this, or I really would encourage you to fill in the
Yeah,
blank?
I would say as much work as it is to be an XP, it is also work for a senior pastor because you're having to let go of some things that you feel like you should do or you could never let anybody else do. And so my thing would be to just say that there are people out there in your churches, whether you can pay them or not, whether, they have the title or not, but who probably want to support the ministry in ways that you're not even familiar with. But if you're willing to hold it with your hands open and give people access and give people permission and give people space and give people authority to step in and lead out of how God made them, I think that there are people that will advance your church, advance the kingdom, and also knowing the season that you're in. Like, it's really easy to look at a church and go, oh, wow, they have like 7 pastors on staff. Like, I wish we could be that. Like, we didn't always have 7 pastors.
Yeah.
We are in a season where I remember the days when I first started that we would have to have staff meetings about if we could get new knives to cut the bagels. I remember sitting around talking about that. We are not in that season anymore.
Yeah.
If we need a knife for a bagel, the person over hospitality can just go get a knife for the bagel. We're not in that season, but you have to know the season that you're in. And it may just be that what the Lord is doing now is just getting you ready for that next thing. But to be content with where God has you in this season, and to not compare yourself to other churches. It's really easy to do that, to look at them and go, oh, this church has this and they have to do this. And like, we should all be working together. Like, steal our ideas, take our ideas, but don't compare and feel like, oh, we're not doing that.
Right.
And also, one size doesn't fit all. It looks different across the board. I really feel like the biggest thing is listening to what God is doing and what God is saying and responding to that. And that's going to look different in everybody's context.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
And again, it just kind of highlights your journey. What you just said to me really sounds like the journey you were on. Here I am going to school. I'm feeling a certain way, mission field, right? Like, and I went to go be a nanny, right? Like, it's Lord. We were talking mission field.
Yep.
I wasn't thinking, like holding and feeding and reading, right? Like I was thinking potentially, right? You can fall into that. Like, when is my time going to come? And yet, God using all of those things to be able to prepare you, right?
I mean, I feel like what I learned in those seasons, even so, speaking as a female, even being a young mom, you feel like you don't get a lot of opportunity. You feel like you're just with the kids. But someone prayed for me that I would experience the presence of the Lord while I did the dishes, that I would experience the presence of the Lord while I watched my kids play sports and do what they love. And that is a gift to me, because it's in those places that I develop an intimacy that when I'm in a hidden space, it just carries out into a more public space. And I do feel like the Lord is so good and gracious, and he will tell you when it's time to come out of hiding. But if you're in hiding and it's because he's placed you there, it's for good reason, and you can trust him in this season.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Well, thank you so much for the time. This has been great. Enjoyable for me, for sure. And I know that our leaders, our licensed workers are definitely going to be blessed by this. And, hopefully, for you as a pastor, a lead pastor, maybe even like an associate, an assistant, like you're listening to this and the ideas are starting to maybe churn in your mind. There's people in your church that like, I'd love to use them in a specific kind of way, but I'm not sure how. Like, maybe this is actually opening your mind up to like, oh, this would be some ways, that we could start to, use our people and even like bless our people by an opportunity to serve, an opportunity to, I just have a heart for the church. I want to make things easier for our lead pastor. So, our hope and prayer for you is that this is beneficial for that. So God bless you, Metro family. And thank you again, Ashley.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Have an awesome day, everybody.